Well, welcome everyone to our Mesa City of Mesa. I think Frankie will be here, I hope soon. And Mesa City Council study session for March 12th, 2026. Oh, all right. As announced, everybody's here. Thank you. We're going to hear a presentation. Item 1A is recommendation on the proposed fees and charges for the Falcon Field Department, one of our enterprises. So Corinne and Sam and I forget our attorney's name. Jill. Yeah, welcome. So we'll turn the time over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor and council members. It's an honor to be here with you this morning, and thank you so much for taking the time to hear about this proposal. As you well know, here on my right is Sam Schultz. You know Sam, and Jill Owens is outside legal counsel with Snell and Wilmer, who has been assisting us from a legal perspective through this process. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Corinne, before we start, if I could just maybe make a statement for council and for the benefit of the public also. Many times it's important to talk about what this is, but I think it's important also to talk about what this isn't. The proposed fees and charges for Falcon Field includes landing fees. Staff is proposing landing fees to make Falcon Field Airport as financially self-sustaining as possible. These fees are not being proposed to reduce noise or flight traffic, discriminate against a specific user, or favor one user over another similarly situated user. That is not allowed under the FAA rates and charges policy. Simply, noise reduction and flight traffic is not part of or the reason for the proposed fees and is not part of this agenda. I just want to manage the expectations of the public that's watching this as they're seeing what we're discussing, but also what we're not discussing and the reason why. Thanks, Mayor. Sorry, Green.
Well, and to that point, that's why we're here. And I think it's been long overdue that we've had this discussion. So again, like I stated, it's one of our enterprises. And so as we look at the financial well-being of our enterprises, this is something that we have to evaluate year to year. And so we appreciate all those that work so hard on it. Councilmember Goforth, she led a team to analyze that, being in her district. So appreciate her work and everyone else. Vice Mayor.
Well, you used the term enterprise, and maybe somebody might want to define what that is or what the enterprises are, since folks might be watching.
Well, I think maybe to Jim and Scott, or they should be able to do that first, and then Sam as well. Mr. City Manager?
Yeah, absolutely. Mayor, actually, I think Sam is probably the best positioned person to really articulate how we treat our enterprise funds.
Okay.
Based on his face, you wish to.
Oh, yeah.
So, Mayor, Council, from an enterprise standpoint, what the city looks for is that this is a self-sustaining fund, similar to like a business where there's no additional contributions when we look at it from a general fund contribution. What we look for is that the revenues from an ongoing basis will sustain those expenditures and the capital expenditures and/or debt service payments within the enterprise fund.
Well, on that point, I think that's for a lot where it's confusing. There's different buckets at the airport that the monies are allowed to be used in, and sometimes they cross lanes, so to speak. And so I think for clarification for what monies can be used for at Falcon is essential for all of us to understand. That's why hopefully you can break it down, what the FAA requires for the runway and ramp services, tie downs, obviously hangars, leases, ground leases. You have a whole
Correct.
portfolio of things, let's put it that way.
And one thing to add with it, when we look at this utility fund, it is restricted from an FAA standard in the sense that the revenues generated within Falcon Field are exclusively used then for expenses related to the operations and infrastructure of Falcon Field.
Okay. I'm sure we'll have some questions as we go on, so just have some clarity in that, I think, for those who are listening in the public and ourselves as council. Okay, Corinne.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. And I think we'll go into a little more detail here regarding that observation of yours and hopefully clarify some of that through the presentation. Okay, so we wanted to include, first of all, the purpose statement for Falcon Field Airport. And I don't need to read through all of these items, but just a few just highlights. It's absolutely critical that we are a safe, reliable, and well-maintained airport. That really, if you don't have a safe, well-maintained airport, you really don't have an asset. So that is really a big focus for all of this. Of course, we're very customer-centered. We want to foster positive community relationships. Again, the need to be financially self-sustaining and also to be a great economic development opportunity that brings jobs to Mesa. So let's talk about the primary sources of airport revenue, which are not related to a grant. So these are revenues that come in that we can use from the enterprise fund to operate the airport. And you can see that list right there. These are the primary sources. The biggest revenue generators are the ground lease rent and the city-owned hangar and tie-down storage room rent. And so that's going to be important to focus on as we go into this. We do have about $340,000 coming in from fuel flowage fees, but that is not enough to support one of the cost centers that we're going to be spending a lot of time on today, which is the Airfield Cost Center.
Mayor, Corinne, I just want to reiterate that point because I think that there's some confusion about what we collect as far as fuel flowage. Can you say that number again?
It's about $340,000 a year.
Annually, okay, that we
Yes.
collect because
Yes.
we don't actually sell the fuel.
We don't sell the fuel. The fuel flowage fee is collected based upon the amount of fuel that is delivered to the airport, with the assumption that it will then be sold.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification.
So some people might say, well, why do you need to be financially self-sustaining? Well, FAA grant assurance 24, which every time we collect funds from the FAA or the state from a grant fund for a capital improvement project, we have to sign a set of assurances, a set of guarantees that as a condition of getting this revenue for a major capital improvement project, we will agree to these assurances. And grant assurance number 24 specifically states that the airport will maintain a fee and rental structure for facilities and services, which will make the airport as self-sustaining as possible. So right there, the FAA is saying, this is the direction we want airports to go. So to give a little background, since 2026, the Airport Enterprise Fund has had a balanced budget due to the following factors. One of them was a one-time $4.6 million net proceeds that we received from the sale of some land that the airport had purchased several years ago, like back in the 80s and 90s. That was sold in 2005, 2006. And as a result of that, $4.6 million from the net proceeds was placed in the Airport Enterprise Fund. So it was a one-time sort of win there for us to have some additional revenue, in addition to the other revenues that we collect on an annual basis from the tenants and the users. We've also been very conservative as to how we budget, and I want to thank the Office of Management and Budget for helping that as well, because they set the standard, they set the amount that we are supposed to stay within when we put together our annual budget, and it's very conservative. And so we've been able to budget conservatively and also be very conservative with our spending practices. However, what's happened is as prices have gone up, and we'll talk a little more about that, we have started having to defer some of our capital improvement projects that we might otherwise be needing to do. And in particular, our deferred maintenance on airfield maintenance and city-owned facilities, we've had to back away from spending the amount of funds that we need to spend on those particular items. And we're going to talk about here what ultimately is going to happen if we continue to defer that.
Sorry, Corinne,
Question.
another question. Can you just give us a couple examples of some of those deferred either maintenance or capital projects that you have had to deferred due to
Yes.
lack of funds? Is
Most
it
of
later
the-
in here? I can't remember.
Most of the
sorry.
capital improvement projects, Mayor, council member, go forth. Most of the capital improvement projects that have been deferred are ones dealing with, that are strictly funded by the airport. So we always try to make sure that we have enough money to fund our local match for a federal or a state grant, because that's money coming into the airport. So we want to make sure that we have that money coming in to do those capital improvement projects. So some of the things that we've deferred are, for example, signage improvements on the land side, which is like along Falcon Drive and Roadrunner and so forth. We've deferred a project to improve some of the landscaping along Falcon Drive. So it's been mostly projects that were not tied to federal or state grants. So that's what we have as far as the capital improvement projects. But the big issue is the airfield pavement. And then the city-owned facilities, we do have 411 city-owned hangars. Several of those hangars were built back in the 90s and the 80s. And quite honestly, what's happened is the paint has oxidized on those hangars. They've never been repainted. In some instances, the metal is just showing right through. And we have held off on doing anything with any of that just simply because we didn't have the funds to do it. So we need to be able to generate revenue at some point so that we can continue to take care of those assets.
And I know the pavement, you'll speak about that as well.
Yes. So here's what Falcon Field's current financial picture is. As of today, we are financially self-sustaining. However, as we look forward, we are not going to be financially self-sustainable with the current situation that we have in terms of our revenues. And that is a result of general inflation, which we've all seen that, all the costs of products and services that the airport purchases have all increased in cost. But what we really started to see was the cost of the capital improvements and for example, the cost for the grant-funded projects, the cost to do the pavement maintenance. All of those costs just really started skyrocketing in about 2020-21. Part of it has to do with the pavement, with the cost of oil and so forth. And so we've gotten to the point where we're paying more or the same amount, but we're getting less for what we are paying. So 7 or 8 years ago, for example, if we were going to do a crack fill and seal coat project on one of our main aircraft parking ramps, now we can only do half of it compared to what we were able to do 6 or 7 years ago, just simply because the cost has gone up. So we need to be able to get some more revenue coming in there so that we can continue to stay ahead of the game, because we'll very quickly fall behind if we don't do something.
Yes, question.
Yes, Corinne, when is the last time the airport increased its rates and fees?
Mayor, Councilmember Duff, last year we did an increase of the hangars and the tie-down rents of 10%. And that's because we started looking at that particular area to see where we were financially with that. Were the hangars and the tie-downs sustaining themselves? And we learned from that analysis that no, they are not. And so last year we embarked upon a program and to let everyone know that we're going to be raising or recommending that we raise these rents for several years if necessary to get them to the point where they will be financially self-sustaining. So last year. So this is just an example. I put this picture in here to show you of some pavement that is in dire need of some work on it. And this is one of our main aircraft parking ramps. As you can see, the fixed base operator there is avoiding parking any aircraft on that area there just simply because the pavement is in such poor condition. And if we continue to let that happen, then at some point, we're going to be looking at complete reconstruction.
Corinne, could you go back to that slide of that picture of that pavement situation? I don't, first question, then I have a comment. How long has this gone unmaintained, that it's developed into these cracks? When was the last time we did anything there?
With this particular ramp, I'd have to,
Approximate is fine.
I'd say at least 6 or 7 years.
6 or 7 years. Well, I'm not an expert in asphalt pavement or other pavements, but I'm thinking that if this goes unchecked, at some point in time, it becomes unrepairable and has to be torn up and redone. Is that a correct assumption?
Mayor, Councilmember Adams, yes, that is absolutely correct. If we do not continue to do the crack fill and the seal coat every 4 to 5 years, then that pavement will eventually get to a point where its condition is so poor that we will have to do a complete reconstruct, which is going to dramatically increase the costs.
Have you received any information as to how much longer this could sit like that before we'd have to do that? Is it almost at end of life?
Mayor, Councilmember Adams, yes, it is almost to the end of its life because we do have a project. We have it listed on our long-term capital improvement project for a complete reconstruct, but that's 5 or 6 years out. So we would need to do at least one more set of crack fill and seal coat before we can request the funding. Because with a reconstruction on a ramp like that, you can request federal or state grant funding for that, which is obviously good because it's very, very expensive. But yes, at this point, that project is probably going to be reconstructed in probably 5 or 6 years.
So in a perfect world, we would have taken care of this a while ago, but we've been forced to defer this.
Mayor, Councilmember Adams, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Green. Good morning.
Good morning.
So I guess I'm just looking at this picture. Am I right in understanding that the asphalt is heaving?
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, it does appear that it is heaving, but what you can see is that it gets the moisture and you have the heat and then the cooling and the heat and the cooling. The weather is what deteriorates the pavement the most. But yes, if you look there, you can see around where the cracks are, that the crack fill is just coming back up. And so it's not an even flat ramp.
And does that have anything to do also with the weight of the aircraft?
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, it really doesn't. It's more the weather that is what
Okay.
deteriorates the pavement.
Yeah, wow, thank you.
All right, so what steps have we already taken as we've seen this situation approaching with a potential shortfall? I already talked about cutting back on non-grant capital improvement projects. We've basically taken the Band-Aid approach with the pavement maintenance where we say, okay, we have this much money that we can put into the ramp and runways and taxiway pavement maintenance, and we're just going to work on the worst pieces of pavement, wherever they are. And if the pavement gets below pavement index, condition index of 50, that's where you're quickly approaching the reconstruction point. And we do have some areas on the airport that do have pavement PCIs that are below 50. So as we look at our pavement projects, we try to tackle those first. But again, if you have one that's in the, let's say, the higher 50s, if you don't pay attention to it very quickly, it will then fall below 50, and then you're looking at reconstruction. So we're just trying to keep up with it. So our colleagues in engineering prepared for us an estimate of what it would cost for ongoing pavement maintenance over the next 8 years, and you can see what this number is. With crack fill and seal coat, as I mentioned earlier, you really need to do it every 4 to 5 years. And so you could go through the entire airport. Let's say we came up with some other money that we could use, and we just did the entire airport. Well, we'd be great for 4 or 5 years, but then we have to start all over again. So it's just a constant cycle of repeating this year after year after year. It's not going to go away. So some people may ask, why can't you just use your federal and your state grants to cover these costs? Well, the FAA and the state will pay for capital improvements that include pavement reconstruction, but they will not pay for the ongoing maintenance. So the 4 to 5 year cycles, they will not pay for that. That is something that we have to pay for ourselves. Now, the state does have some pavement maintenance money that they distribute to airports across the state of Arizona, and occasionally we will get one of those grants to help with some of our pavement, but that is primarily used for runways and taxiways. That's their primary focus, keep the runways and the taxiways in good condition. They will not pay for anything, for example, in the areas where the city-owned hangars are located, down in that part, or on any of the other major aircraft parking ramps. They will not pay for that. So that is all on the airport to pay for.
Karina, I have another question. How
Yes.
long does a full pavement reconstruction last? You know, you're saying the fill and seal is about 5 years, so we were just rip the whole entire thing up and redo it. What is the estimated timeline on that?
Good question. Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, that would probably last the airport at least 15 to 20 years, if not more, if it's really well maintained.
And can we exceed that 70 mark when we do something like that? Is there kind of a goal? I know that's the FAA's minimum, but is there a goal to say, maybe we should go a little bit above that?
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, that is correct. If you do a complete reconstruct, then you will exceed that 70. You may be up in the 80s and the 90s. So at that point, if you can then just go back and do the crack fill and the seal coat, and you do it on a regular basis, then you can get, you might even be able to get 30 years out of it if you.
You extend that
if
cycle
you-
significantly. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So as we were looking at our situation with the costs going up so dramatically, we looked at the financial situation with the airport and said, well, we probably need to be looking at doing something different. And this is something we started looking at 3 or 4 years ago because we saw what was happening. So in 2024, we started having some conversations about converting to what they call a cost center approach for how you look at your areas of the airport. This is an approach that the FAA fully supports, that you set up various zones, if you will, within your airport and work towards making each one of those areas financially self-sustaining. And so that's what we decided to do. We said, okay, because we know for a fact right now what is happening is the ground lease tenants are major subsidizers of the rest of the airport. None of these, the Airfield Cost Center and the city-owned hangars and tie-downs are not financially self-sustaining. They are relying on the revenues generated from the ground leases. So we made the decision that the goal would be to get each one of the cost centers financially self-sustaining. And of course, we recognize that this may take a little bit of time. So in August of 2025, we came before this council, or the council, and we said we're going to take one step at a time, and we decided we were going to look at the city-owned hangars and tie-downs. As I mentioned previously, we discovered they were not financially self-sustaining, and so we said, okay, let's put together a program here to try to get them financially self-sustaining over the next 3 to 5 years. So last year, council approved an 8% increase in the hangars and the tie-downs. So that was step one of us moving in this direction. So for this year, we took a look again at the city-owned hangars, and we recognized the biggest cost in the city-owned hangars area and the tie-down area is the pavement. You know, we have tenants that will ask us, well, you know, what are you paying for my hangar? It's been here, it's paid off, blah, blah, you know, it's the pavement. That is the biggest cost of, you know, providing that area for those tenants and users. We also, after the 2023 storm, where we lost over 90 hangar doors off of our hangars, we made the decision to invest in installing cane bolts, which would help hold the doors in when we have our next storm. It's not if, it's when. It's going to happen. And we have 3 more years. We phased this out over 5 years. We have 3 more years that we need funding for to get that completed. And then we also need to start placing some funds in some type of a capital reserve to start repainting those hangars. Otherwise, they're just going to continue to deteriorate. The metal is going to continue to be exposed to the hot temperatures and the weather, and we just don't want to let those deteriorate. So that's going to cost about $2 million. So for this proposal, we are recommending a 10% increase rental rate for the hangars. Then as far as the tie downs, we really drilled down a little more this year in the tie downs themselves. Last year, we kind of included them in with the hangars. And right now, we discovered that we are only charging about 55% of the cost of what is needed for the tie downs to be financially self-sustaining. So that's pretty substantial shortfall there. So our recommendation for this year is to raise the open tie-down fees by 23% and the covered tie-down fees by 11%. Now, a common question that people might ask is, well, why don't you just raise them more? Well, you have to keep in mind that you have your hangars, that you're charging X amount for the hangars, then you have the covered tie-downs, and then you have the open tie-downs. You have to be careful when you do your rate increases for the tie-downs so that they don't get to the point to where you're paying more for a tie-down than you are for a hanger. So we have to kind of move all of those up together. And so that's why we came up with the formula that we came up for this year.
Corinne, what's like an average cost for a tie down? What kind of fees?
Right now, the current rate for, Mayor, Councilmember Duff, right now, the current rate for an open tie down is $55 a month.
Okay, so we're talking about 11 or, okay, 23. Okay.
Corinne, what are other airports charging for that?
Mayor, we are pretty much in the ballpark right now with what the other airports are charging.
Okay.
And Corinne, what is a financially self-sustained tie-down look like? Like what are the requirements for a tie-down to be excellent?
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, a well-maintained tie-down would be a tie-down, first of all, that has good pavement under it, that has at least a 70% or more pavement. And then the chains, you have the bolts that go into the pavement, and then you put a chain onto the bolt, and then the chain is used then to tie down the aircraft so that when the wind comes up, hopefully the plane won't be turned over.
It's reducing the friction that could happen to release that bolt from the pavement. Is that what we're looking to make sure it doesn't happen? It doesn't come out?
It doesn't come out.
Yeah. I'm
Right.
thinking layman's terms, like how do I? Okay,
Right.
that's helpful. Thank
You're
you.
trying to hold the plane down and keep it
Got
from
it.
just blowing off across.
Okay.
the
I've never
runways.
seen one, so I'm like trying to imagine this.
Well,
in my
we'd love
mind.
to have you come
Thank
out.
you.
We'll
Yeah.
specifically
That's very
take a tour
helpful.
of the tie-down
I think
area.
I think I've constructed it in my mind, but that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So now let's move on to the cost center. And we knew that the cost center was going to be this cost center was going to be the most challenging of all, because we knew that there really isn't, other than the fuel flowage fees, There's a few other small revenue sources that feed money into the airfield cost center, but the main one is those fuel flowage fees. And if you look at the list here, you will see all of the areas that are included in the airfield cost center, and it's substantial. And so that's why we needed to take a look at it and see what we could come up with in order to make this airfield cost center financially self-sustaining as well. So what we did is we looked at our estimated costs for this fiscal year, which we are anticipating the cost for the airfield cost center to be approximately $2.4 million at the end of the year. The estimated revenue for that cost center, $374. That's the $340,000 plus another $30,000 coming in from these other small revenue sources like rental car concessions, gate access cards, and so forth. So you can see that there's a substantial shortfall there. There's a $2 million shortfall that we have discovered is occurring in this area. So we looked at a variety of different options, looked at what other airports are doing and so forth. Ultimately, we honed in on an increase to the avgas fuel flowage fee. We want to be careful we don't raise the fuel flowage fees too much, because at that point, the FBO, of course, is going to pass that cost along to the customer. And if their fuel prices get to be too high, then people are not going to want to come to Falcon Field to buy fuel. So we have to raise it gradually, but we don't want to, raise it so much that nobody wants to buy fuel here. So we're recommending an increase to 15% for that, and then ultimately we made the decision to propose the landing fees.
Corinne, I'll just say on that point, I think that, Councilmember, there's not a lot of fuel stations that you can go to. I mean, other than the closest airports would be where?
Mayor, the closest airports would be Mesa Gateway and Chandler, Scottsdale.
It's not like they're on every corner.
No.
Okay. Councilmember Adams.
Thank you, Mayor. Included in that $2,400,000 airfield cost center cost, we have to maintain at our fire station, I think the apparatus is called a crash truck. It's a specialty apparatus and specially trained firefighters who can deal with aviation-related fires. So that's included there too, and that's a specialty thing, isn't it? That it's not by choice, it's by requirement, but that probably costs a little bit more than the average fire station, I would imagine.
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Adams, it is a specialty area. The truck itself is specially designed to respond to aircraft incidents. It's got the foam on it. If you've got jet fuel flowing out, you need to put the right type of fire depressant on it. And then the people who are operating the truck and responding to the incident also have to be FAA certified as aircraft rescue firefighters, which requires them to go through training, ongoing training, and so forth. So the cost that the airport is paying right now, we are paying for about 63%, I believe, of the cost of the 6 firefighters.
Correct. So for the fire truck, that was paid with the general obligation bond. For the people, when we set this up, it was to cover from the operating hours of the tower that there would be someone on site. So they're looking, I believe it's 15 hours per day, 15 hours, 7 days a week for that coverage. So we looked at the ratio of those firefighters to then cover the allocation to have a firefighter for each of those hours.
But they are stationed there 24 hours a day. So if there's an incident at 2 in the morning and they become aware of it, then they will respond. Now, I just want to qualify here, as a general aviation airport, Falcon Field is not required by the FAA to have aircraft rescue firefighting coverage. However, I believe it was back in the 1990s, the city council made the decision that it was important to provide that service at Falcon Field. And we are very thankful that we have that service there. Last year, they responded to 80 incidents on the airport. And so it is a very important service that we have on
That
the
was-
airport.
Thank you. That was going to be my next question. So I agree. I think it would be totally imprudent of us to not provide that.
Yeah, Mayor, council member, while not required, we don't view it as optional. With just we see time and time again how having that safety for our residents pays off.
Vice Mayor.
You made a statement a moment ago about the increase in the avgas fuel flow rate. You don't want to increase that rate so much that you lose business as far as fuel flow. How does that also tie into landing fees and some of these other charges? Are we not concerned that that could move business elsewhere? And what's the impact of that going to be if we lose business? How do these books balance out?
Mayor, Vice Mayor Summers, that is a good question. We do recognize, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit, that there is a possibility that if the landing fees are approved, that some people may make a decision to fly to another airport instead of using Falcon Field. As far as the fuel flowage, though, it's critical that we do have the fuel available for those who are at the airport and those who choose to be at the airport and for those who choose to fly in on a short-term basis. Right now, we only have one full-service fixed-base operator, and if that fixed-base operator is not able to compete with the fuel prices that are being charged elsewhere in the valley, and that fuel provider goes out of business, then the airport's going to have even bigger problems. So we looked at that as a trade-off.
And do we anticipate that that problem would then be an issue across other airports in the valley? GA airports, anyway?
I'm sorry.
If we lose suppliers for avgas, does that also impact other airports?
Mayor, Vice Mayor Summers, if we lose our fuel supplier, then there won't be any fuel available at Falcon, and they will have to fly to another airport to fuel.
So it's a Falcon issue, okay.
Right.
Question, Mayor. Are there other GA airports or GAs, I guess that's redundant, that are the FBO that sell the gas?
Mayor, Council Member Goforth, yes, that is correct. There are other general aviation airports that are the fuel provider.
And so they're collecting more revenue based on, obviously,
Yes.
that's a revenue generator for them that we don't have.
We don't have, but
Yeah.
then, of course, you also have to incur the costs for
sure.
operating the fuel in terms of staffing and fuel tanks and compliance with all of the environmental requirements.
So
and
do you
forth.
know, is this fairly competitive, this fee, for those that are not the FBO, for those airports?
Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, yes. This is helping the current FBO, the primary FBO, to remain competitive
Okay.
with the market around us.
Okay, thank you.
Corinne, I'm going to stop you there. Jill, is there anything you want to add to our discussion outside council? I'm sure there's something that you'd like to maybe cover on one or two things.
Mayor, I don't have anything to add. Corrine is answering perfectly all of the questions, so there's, yeah, perfectly.
Those two
yes.
look perfectly happy where they are.
Well, we'll put you on standby.
Thank you.
I was with a pilot recently, like a couple of days ago, and they said, why don't you just double your fuel flowage fees? You could pay for everything. And I thought, well, okay, we're raising it up a penny, right? I don't know what other airports pay or the FBOs, but I thought, is that reasonable to double it?
Mayor,
I don't want to do that.
It would probably not be reasonable because, again, at that point, it would, the fixed base operator, fuel provider would have to pass that cost along to the customer. And so now the fuel prices to purchase at Falcon are going to be so much higher that people are not going to want to. And you'll even have people who are based at Falcon Field saying, I'm not going to buy my fuel here. I'm going to fly over to Gateway or Chandler or Casa Grande and buy my fuel. And we don't want that to happen.
Well, I think that's happening today at all the gas stations around with the fuel increase, not to belabor that. But I understand that. He just mentioned that to me. I didn't have an answer
Right.
where competitiveness was between the FBOs and other airports.
It is, it's very competitive.
Are we, okay, so we are within the range of, 14, 15 cents if we decide to raise it?
Mayor, yes, that is correct. The primary FBO, as well as the second FBO that only sells jet fuel, their prices are very competitive. They watch, obviously, these companies watch each other daily and adjust accordingly. And generally, the FBO at Falcon is 1 or 2 cents below some of the others. And that's intentional because he's trying to attract people to Falcon.
Okay. Did you have
Mayor, on that line, I think there's a misconception out there in the public that we collect a lot of revenue from the fuel flowage, enough to cover the gaps in our cost. And even if we doubled it, we're not even close to covering the gaps, right? So I think that comment probably came from somebody that, I mean, people have told me, oh, well, you get about $13 million in, so there is a huge misconception out there about what we collect for fuel. So, that we're not even the FBO, we don't sell it, and we currently collect 14 cents on the dollar, so.
Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, I think that's a great point because when you look at this slide, you see where our current revenues are, which is mainly driven by the fuel flowage fee. So at the 374 or 374,000, if we were to just double that, that still puts us only at what's that, 6 or 750? 750. So we're still behind on that collection of being self-sustaining.
Ms. Taylor?
Yeah, just for anyone who's listening, I also wanted to point out just the fundamental aspect that in any revenue generation instance, it's not wise to generate all of your revenue from one source. You don't invest in only one source. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. If something were to happen where we could no longer offer fuel, that would immediately cut off our source. So just even from that philosophical perspective, it would just be very imprudent of us for us to move forward in that direction.
Okay, and time's yours.
All right. So the methodology that we used to ultimately come up with the proposed landing fee, we took several factors into consideration. The first thing is we had to look and see, as we've shown you, okay, what do we need to make this cost center financially self-sustaining? And so when we ran the numbers, we came up with the $2 million, which is a substantial amount of funds for Falcon Field. But we also, the FAA requires that the fees must be reasonable and they can't be unjustly discriminatory. For example, you can't charge, let's say you have one type of operator and another type of operator. You can't unjustly discriminate against them and say, well, you're gonna pay the bulk of all of this and so forth. So when we made the decision to do what we've proposed, the decision was that we need to have everybody paying. We need to have everybody paying, except for a few exemptions, which is included in the proposal. And so we looked at that, but we also looked at other general aviation airports and what they are charging for their landing fees. And it's one of those things where there is no standard in the general aviation airports as far as landing fees. It's all over the place. Some of them will charge this, but others don't. And They'll exempt these people, but they won't exempt these others. So it really ends up being, it's very difficult for us to say, okay, this is what 70% of the airports are doing, so let's do that. We really had to come up with what works best for Falcon Field Airport. But we did not go into it blind without knowing what other airports were doing. Then we also looked at the possibility, and you brought that up earlier, that we may end up having some of our customers say, well, I don't think I want to land at Falcon. And probably the first group that might say that might be the itinerants that are flying in that maybe have lots of airports to choose from. And say, well, if I don't have to pay a landing fee at Gateway, then maybe I'll go and land at Gateway if it still works into the scheme of things. So we had to recognize that's a business choice on their part. We're not trying to push anybody away. We're not trying to scare anybody off. We're trying to balance the budget is what we're trying to do. And so some people may look at that and say, okay, well, that doesn't work for me, and I'm going to go somewhere else. So we took that into consideration as far as when coming up with the rate that we did.
Corinne, Vice Mayor.
So Corinne and City Manager and possibly the mayor want to chime in on this. What you just said concerns me a little bit, because you used Gateway as an example. Gateway is not a GA airport.
This is true.
It is a regional airport specifically intended for passenger travel and logistics. So the types of flights and operations are very different. Are we paying attention to that at Gateway Airport and not trying to move the types of operations that don't match what that airport needs? Because there are safety concerns with respect to that, in addition to economic development concerns.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, I can address that one. The short answer is yes. Gateway staff and the board and others have already discussed the possibilities of what ripple effect impacts could be on other airports, including more specifically Gateway. And so they're going to monitor this situation, and they have some alternatives that they're considering to make sure that they maintain the safety that they need for the commercial traffic that comes in and out of Gateway.
I'll weigh in. It's on the radar.
Well, and Mayor, Vice Mayor Summers, I'll retract that and say people may choose to fly to Chandler.
That would,
You're okay with that?
Because that's a GA airport.
Right.
Deer Valley's a GA
Yeah.
airport. Nobody, I wouldn't think we would want it. Sky Harbor also would not be an appropriate use.
Correct.
Thank you.
Well, I think it comes down to the Vice Mayor's comment about the mission of the airports. Gateway's a commercial passenger large airport with 3 10,000-foot runways, has a whole different mission than Falcon or Chandler or Deer Valley or Glendale or Coolidge or wherever you want to fly. So our mission is to look at changes potentially at Falcon, and that mission is to make sure it's self-reliable. I'll say more at the end, but to that point, I just know that Gateway has looked at and will continue to look at. They do have a small general aviation component there, and it's all about capacity and how you can manage that. But that's a whole different topic, but we're concerned about Falcon today. So carry on.
Those GAs are tied to universities.
All right.
Okay.
Go ahead, Corinne.
Okay. So these are the proposed landing fees that we have put on the table for your consideration. I won't go through every one of those numbers, but I'll let you take a look at that. You may have already had an opportunity to look at it when you were reviewing this previously. there are some exemptions that we are proposing. I'll go through those. First of all, if you are an aircraft that is based at Falcon Field, you would be given the first 10 landings for each aircraft that you have. First 10 landings per month would be free. Now, what is a based aircraft? A based aircraft is an aircraft that is stored at an airport for more than 6 months. So if that aircraft is not stored at Falcon Field for more than 6 months, it is not going to be considered a based aircraft. We currently have about 877 based aircraft at Falcon, and that's a number that we keep track of on a regular basis. Also excluded would be rotorcraft, drones, the eVTOLs, which are the electrical vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that are starting to come online. If they're landing on an exclusive use ramp, then they would not be charged a landing fee. And by exclusive use, what we mean is it's their ramp. They're leasing the land from us. They've built their own ramp on there. So we're not going to charge them a landing fee if they're going to land on their own ramp, because they're not impacting our situation. If an aircraft, a pilot declares an emergency, as in an FAA Alert 1, 2, or 3, there's 3 different levels. If they've declared an emergency, they would be exempt from the landing fee, because we just want to focus on making sure they make it down safely. And then the next one involves rotorcraft that are landing, particularly in what we call the echo ramp training area. If they are doing a training and testing session there in that fixed location, their first landing would be counted as a landing fee. But then if they're just going up and down and moving forward a few feet and then dropping down, I mean, it doesn't seem prudent to be charging them every time they land, because now, if they do 10 landings, that's going to get really, really expensive. So the first landing, though, would be counted. Then also, if they're moving between the training and the testing pattern, testing area, and just flying in the pattern, which is called the Yankee pattern, they would be subject to the first landing, because again, they're doing training and testing. And also, if they are going to be moving from the training and testing ramp over to their own ramp, where they store the rotorcraft, then that would not be charged as a landing, because they're landing on their own ramp. So aircraft that are owned by government agencies would also be exempt. Aircraft that are under contract for sale to a government agency would be exempt. However, certain restrictions apply, and I don't want to go into the detail on that. It is laid out in the fees and charges schedule as to what that means, but basically they have to have authorization from some U.S. government agencies. They have to get authorization for that aircraft and that transaction through the U.S. government to be doing this. Then aircraft that are owned by, again, based tenants as part of production flight testing prior to delivery to an end-use customer. We do have several tenants at the airport who do manufacture various types of aircraft. And so if they're doing some production testing prior to them being able to then sell it to their customer, we would not be charging them for a landing fee to do that testing, because again, it's a safety issue. We want to make sure that they do enough testing to ultimately sell a safe product. Then flights conducted in support of government functions that include public safety, search and rescue, disaster response, infrastructure protection, and emergency operations would be exempt. If we have special events that are sponsored by the city and there's aircraft involved in that, we will not charge them a landing fee for participating in our special event. And then flights for medical purposes, the transporting of patients, blood, or organs, and animal rescue purposes would be exempt.
Corinne, I have a question on the flights conducted in support of government functions. Did we capture everything in there that you needed, Jill, for FAA purposes? I mean, would there be something that we did not think of that should be in there? You know, when you talk about public safety, search and rescue, disaster response, is that like forest fire fighting as well, wildland fire?
Mayor, council, the intent was to pick up exactly that, forest fighting, all the public service functions. It's not an FAA requirement. It's,
Okay.
as far as it being an exemption, it's a choice that the airport sponsor can.
Well, my question is, want to make sure we capture all the public safety components that we need to allow that type of service to be rendered out of Falcon if the need arises.
That was the intent of the language, with the broad language, public safety, emergency operations.
Okay,
Yes.
all right.
So is that only during an emergency? So going back to one of your slides, and you don't have to redo it, but in the background are two fire suppression aircraft. Do they practice there, do any of that operation? Are they based there all the time? And would they incur landing fees if they're not engaged in wildfire operations?
Mayor, Vice Mayor Summers, yes, if they were doing something other than participating in their designated purpose for being there, then yes, they could potentially be subject to that.
Okay, so pilot certification training, they have to do a certain number of landings. Would that incur a fee?
If they choose to do it at Falcon, then yes, it would.
Okay. And for clarity, because you answered this question, I asked this during the Finance Committee, for government sales, Boeing sells to a number of our allies abroad. The U.S. government has to certify and allow that sale. That would also be included as being exempt based on these rules. Is that correct?
Mayor, Councilmember Summers, that's correct. If it's under a contract for sale to a government agency, and that includes state, local, federal, and foreign governments, so long as the foreign government is, as Corinne mentioned earlier,
Approved by?
by the U.S. government.
All right, thank you. Continue.
And Mayor, Vice Mayor Summers, I would just like to clarify that we have several tenants at Falcon Field that would fall under this classification. Okay. So as we start summarizing here, I want you to share with you a look at what our financial forecast is if we do not increase any of our rents in the hangars and the tie-down areas, and if the landing fees are not implemented. If you look at where we ended up in 2024-25, we have a pretty healthy ending fund balance there at the bottom. But then as we get into the next year, well, the current year and outer years, you can see that ending fund balance is going to decline dramatically to where by 28, 29, we will no longer be operating as financially self-sustainable. And a lot of that has to do with, again, the projects, the capital improvement projects, which grant projects are being funded, and some of them can be our local match on, some of them can be very expensive. They can be $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, depending upon what the project is. And then, of course, putting more money into the pavement maintenance to just try to get caught up and stay caught up with that. We're going to have to throw a lot of revenue at that to keep going. Now, if the fees are approved, then you look at the bottom line and you can see that we will not be operating at a deficit or a shortfall, and that we would be able to retain a healthy but not overly high ending fund balance, which the FEA does not allow us to have a lot of surplus funds lying around. So we do need to make sure that whatever we're charging, we're going to be spending it, and then keeping a certain amount in a reserve so that if we have unanticipated expenditures come up, we can address those. So that is what the financial picture would potentially look like if council chooses to approve the landing fees.
Question?
Yes.
I'm assuming that you, in your expense side, you've factored in for inflation. May I ask what rate you projected with over this period of time?
Mayor, Councilmember Adams, for inflation from a citywide standpoint, generally look at the CPI Western and compound that into the forecast. For some of the construction where we look at pavement maintenance, we look at that as being on the project side, that being kind of a bucket every year. So when Corinne talked about where we were previously to where we are now, we used to look at budgeting that for the 600,000 to 800,000, but with the needs to provide the same amount of service that we did previously, that's getting bumped up to about 1.4 million. And then we're going to hold that steady as that then continues to improve over the next few fiscal years of what then additional is needed to then cover that pavement maintenance. But to your first question in general, when we look at the inflation, it's the CPI Western.
Okay, so essentially the same numbers we look at in our overall budgeting process.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Duff.
On the spreadsheet, the financial spreadsheet, and project costs, so those are the maintenance and CIP projects. What is project costs?
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Duff, yes, that line includes any airport portions of any grant-funded projects. We don't include any of the federal grant funds in that line. There are no outside funds included in either one of these spreadsheets. They're strictly airport funds. And so, yes, that would include our local match for any federal or state grant projects, as well as the cane bolts that I mentioned earlier, and for the pavement maintenance.
So these are Falcon Fields costs?
That is correct.
Based on the maintenance and CIP that you need to do?
That is correct.
Okay. Looking at your reserve balance, is there a goal that you're trying to, as percentage? I'm just looking at the, the total expenses. If I looked at that line, and our reserve balance is running maybe 30 to 50%, depending on the year?
Mayor, Councilmember Duff, as far as the ending fund balance, our ultimate goal that we have strived for is to ensure that we always have at least $2.5 million in the ending fund balance.
Okay, so we're achieving a little bit more than that.
A little bit more.
Could you speed up some of the project?
Potentially, yes. Potentially, but again, we are going to review these fees and charges at a minimum on an annual basis.
Okay.
And if we find that, hey, things are looking pretty good here, then in future budget cycles, maybe we don't have to come back and, recommend a higher fee increase for the hangars and tie downs, or, we can always revisit these fees.
All right, thanks.
Anyone else? Ms. Taylor?
I just had a question about the verbiage. I was curious to know what is a transfer out? What does that mean? And the costs and transfers out?
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, for transfers out in the Falcon Field, this represents the contribution of our savings for our OPEB or our retiree medical. So with our retiree medical, the city chose to extend that benefit that was then pulled back in 2009. When we extend that benefit, we were also setting aside funds to prepare ourselves better from a financial statement of coverage for our long-term financial sustainability of the lifetime medical. And with that, we look at the retirees of what the current proportion of it, and we apply this across the citywide. And that transfer out represents that contribution to the savings for that retiree medical.
Okay, that was a little bit longer. So I'm putting this together. So in a really short statement, that's just Falcon Field, correct me if I'm wrong here, as an entity contributing to the retirement benefits for our employees?
Correct, into the reserve fund.
Thank you. That was, got it.
Your turn, Ms. Goforth.
So you talked about this in the audit and finance, but for the people that are listening, if you could, because this only affects the users of the airport, can you talk about public outreach and what you've done to notify and explain to the users of the airport these proposed changes?
Mayor and Councilmember Goforth, we really do strive to have good public outreach with our users, that not only aeronautical users nationwide, but with our, of course, especially with our tenants. And so some of the things that we have done, obviously we held meetings last year already with the aeronautical users and tenants when we were looking to increase the hangar rents initially. And we shared with them at that time that this year we would be looking at the Airfield Cost Center. And so we did let them know that that would be happening. And then this year we held 15 public outreach meetings they were virtual, but 15 public outreach meetings to the aeronautical users and our tenants. The first ones, we did a presentation. The last several, it was just a question and answer. We had no presentations. We said, we posted this information on the website. We notified them when it was posted on the website. We sent out a notice saying, go to this website page and you can learn all about the landing fees and how we got to where we are today. So that was a notice we sent out to them. And then we had the question and answer meetings that were not very well attended, but we did do the outreach there. We also have on a monthly basis, and we've been doing this for several years, we have an Ask the Airport, which is a 30-minute opportunity for us to get together virtually with any tenants who might want to participate, to answer any questions that they may have, and to give them updates on what's going on at the airport. And so we really do try to communicate with the tenants because we know it's going to affect them, and with the aeronautical users who even aren't based at Falcon. We really want to get that out there and let them know so that if they do have input and feedback, they can provide that, which several of them did. And there are some adjustments that we did make to the original proposal that were based upon feedback that we received from the aeronautical users. So that input was welcome, and it was, and we put some of it into the proposal.
Corinne, I have a couple more. If we move forward on landing fees, how does that work? Who's going to monitor it? How does that process? And then Sam, for you, coming up, a question is, had we not received the $4.6 million back in the day, would we have had this conversation earlier than today? You go ahead, Sam.
Mayor,
I mean, in your analysis, thought.
I think what we're seeing now and what really kind of drove this conversation initially when we started this last year was the inflationary increases represented around the asphalt and the pavement maintenance. And then as we're looking into these cost centers of being self-sustaining, we're looking to true up each of those areas where before we did have some contributions in other areas that were offsetting some of those prior losses. With the 4.6 million, the answer would be yes, in the sense that we would have had this conversation earlier, in the sense that we would have had to address our revenues not matching our expenses.
And Mayor, if I could just add to that as well, and I think that's key here because it's applying the same philosophy that we have towards our other enterprise funds. Right now, because we have been very frugal and deferred projects that we needed to in order not to have to pass on those costs, we're in a situation now where we're having to do larger increases and institute fees because we didn't do those smaller incremental increases in the past. Like we preach about when we talk about our utility rate, we haven't applied that same principle with this fund historically because there's in my time here, there's always been the concern of a burden on the user and how is this impacting the user. But the problem is, this is coming to roost now where we've kicked the can down the road, but now we're seeing and highlighted by the fact that inflation has dramatically increased these costs, but deferring the maintenance on the pavement by not doing some of these improvements on the airfield and others, it's having an impact on our ability to maintain the type of quality airport that people expect, that the users expect. And so we have to, as Sam said, we have to true this up. And this is setting the stage to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And then our commitment to you is that we're going to continue then to look at those adjustments that would need to be necessary, just like we do in all of our enterprise funds, to say that we're not looking at this situation again and that we're not having to do larger percentage increases when those smaller incremental increases to keep up with inflation and just rising costs and other things like that would be a much easier conversation for people and users of the airport to absorb than some of the larger increases that we have to do now. But that doesn't take away from the fact that we need to do this to maintain a safe and efficient airport, and that's the situation we're faced with today.
Corinne, back to you on landing fees. How is that going to be if approved?
Mayor, the way that would work is that if the council approves the landing fees, then we would, in cooperation with procurement, we would put out an RFP to hire an outside party, a vendor that does provide the services of collecting the data on the aircraft that are landing, of tabulating what those landing fees would be, sending out the invoices, collecting from them, and then, of course, addressing the situation if the users choose not to pay the fee.
Okay. In your discussions with this, and yourself and Jill, have you had conversations with the FAA on landing fees in general? I mean, maybe explain that, Jill and Corinne, how are we, obviously that's the angst with this fee increase if it's done, our landing fees. So just maybe explain to everybody how that's happened. Have you worked with FAA? Are we out of the range? Is there a range? You said earlier there wasn't really a range yet, making it reasonable to incur a landing fee. So I'm interested in what you two might say.
Answer that?
Mayor and Council, yes, we have had a conversation with the FAA. The FAA's requirements and the rates and charges policy is that the fees on an airfield be fair and reasonable, not unjustly discriminatory. They also have to be supported by the rate base. And part of the conversation with the FAA was about the rate base, and that's what you saw in the financials today. And the FAA didn't seem to express any concern on that call about the rate base and that being justified. They didn't have comments on the exemptions, that it appeared to be applied discriminatory. the fair and reasonable kind of comes into play in looking at the comparable airports. And as Corinne mentioned earlier, it's the GA, it's kind of a hard comparison because every GA airport's a little bit different. And I think the FAA recognizes that. And so this landing fee, while it might be higher than what one typically sees, as long as it's fair and reasonable and not unjustly discriminatory, and it's fair and reasonable under the circumstances at the airport, it should be supportable. Not sure what else if I would add to that.
Mayor, council members, I would just say, yeah, as we were going through this entire process, we were very cognizant of the FAA and their various requirements. And so that was like in the forefront of our minds as we worked through this process. So,
Well, I heard the words fair and reasonable, but if somebody chooses to challenge that, I just want to make sure that it's being supported by our analysis and cost benefit for the airport, for the enterprise, because we do not want an underperforming asset in our city.
right.
So based on what you're saying, it is FAA, if that challenge was pushed to them, they would look at it and then now, go through the whole process and come back to us.
Mayor, that's correct. If it were challenged, then the FAA would make that independent determination. They have not made that. They haven't made a predetermination. We're going on what the one conversation we had with them. They won't make that determination unless they have unless they're prompted to as a result of a complaint. And they would look at everything. They would look at everything that the airport's already been looking at. And in terms of fair and reasonable, they'll look across the country, across the region, across the country. And it's subjective. What's fair and reasonable, that's a subjective determination,
Okay.
ultimately in the hands of the FAA.
All right. Is that with the Western Area Director? You have the conversation with them or somebody higher up?
It was
Mayor, the conversation was held with the Phoenix Airport's district office manager, as well as the compliance manager from the Eastern region and the compliance manager from the Western Pacific region, as well as the deputy administrator of the Western Pacific region.
Good, thank you. Yeah.
So you created 3 buckets for cost recovery, right? The hangars and tie downs, the airfield, and the ground leases. And then you attributed fees and charges accordingly in order to have a cost recovery. So the revenues generated and the fees, are they in reserve funds for each one of those buckets, or is just in a general fund? Are you taking the revenues from those cost recoveries and putting in a dedicated fund to only pay for those associated costs? Or is it just all these costs are going into one bucket and then you would just allocate? Do you have
Mayor, Councilmember Duff, from the tracking of this, will be
restricted funds, I should say, not reserve,
yeah.
restricted funds?
So from the revenues will all go into the Falcon Field Fund. From a tracking mechanism, we'll utilize the chart account element of activity. So each of those cost centers has its own activity. So within those activities, we'll see the identification of where the expenses are, as well as the revenues. So if the landing fees were approved, we would look at setting up that revenue code into that activity that we would then track to ensure that those activities are being self-sustaining.
Great, so we can look at it as we go forward, what's working, what's not, and be more efficient.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Taylor?
Thank you. I just have one quick follow-up question, Corinne. I think you said that we were going to look to go out and get an RFQ for, this is where I'm trying to get clarification. Would it essentially be for a third-party company that would be maintaining the intake of the fees, the accounting, following up with some sort of collections that people, for when people don't pay. So that would require the city to go out and then hire essentially a separate entity to do that for us. I just want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly.
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, yes, that is correct. We don't have the software capabilities or the staffing resources to be able to do that, but there are companies out there that do
Right.
it for lots of other airports.
Manage it for us. So then are we recouping that cost as well?
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, yes, that was factored into our costs for the Airfield Cost Center. We, of course, we won't know until we negotiate an actual percentage of what revenue they will retain for their services. But based upon what we know that was charged at some other airports, we put in a number.
That's good. So you have an idea of what the cost should look like?
Yes.
Even before we get
Yes.
the proposals? Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you.
Mr. Adams?
Thank you. Corinne, I know that we've deferred maintenance for various reasons over the last few years, and would you agree with me that my view is that if we don't address this deferred maintenance soon, as proposed, that the cost at some point in time down the road, if we don't, will just exponentially continue to increase. So the problem gets bigger and bigger and more challenging as time goes on. Would you agree
Yes,
with me?
Mayor, Councilmember Adams, yes, I would agree with that. It
Okay.
will.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Goforth? Ms. Time's yours.
Oh, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you to the three of you, and Corinne, especially you and all the work you and your team have done. And thank you to Jill and Sam. You know, because this sits in District 5, and when I came on the council in 2023, we have had numerous conversations about
Yes, we
Falcon
have.
and its operations. And I know that back in 2024, and you had discussions even before I became involved, but that you saw on the horizon and the forecast that revenues were not going to cover expenses based on all the reasons that you've given. And that you were going to look at each area of the airport as their own cost center, as you called it, which I think is smart. We should make sure that the fees that the users are paying are covering those costs. And so, as you said, you came to us last year during budget season and said, we have a 3 to 5 year plan to bring the first cost center that we've completed the analysis for up to self-sustaining.
Yes.
And I said, why are we waiting 3 to 5 years? The users of that portion of the airport should pay for the costs that are incurred to maintain it. That was my position. I got outvoted on that, and we went ahead and we approved the plan to do slight increases for the next 3 to 5 years. And I understood why, that the users needed a little bit of time to adjust to some increases. But my philosophy, as I said, and my financial principle is that the fees should cover those costs. And so here we are again. And my point of that also is to reiterate that these discussions have been going on for quite some time, not just at the airport, but with council as well. They haven't just come up. And I think it's important also that we've been asked, well, we already pay rent, we already pay lease, that should be enough. We shouldn't also have to pay a landing fee. But it's just like anything. If you rent your home, you rent your apartment, you also pay a fee to drive on the roads. It's a different cost center, if you will. And so this is and I like how that's a separate cost center. We can track that, and it has to pay for itself. And everybody that uses it has to pay to maintain it. And so for those in the public, I've talked to a lot of residents, and they want to see that model maintained, that the users of the airport pay for the maintenance of the airport. And it doesn't come from those that don't step foot. And because the airport provides a business for a lot of users. Yes, it is recreational and personal to some, But for the majority of the users on the airport, they're running a business. And our general population and residents don't want to have to pay for that use for those other business opportunities. So as Jen mentioned, this is something that we look at annually. We look at our fees and charges. And I know it's been mentioned several times, but I think it's important to reiterate that this is not a one and done, but that we will absolutely evaluate this each year to make sure it's actually covering the costs. And as you said, that it's unnecessary to maybe increase. Let's see. And I'm not sure, we have, at Falcon Field, we have every hangar, every tie down is used, is that correct?
Yes.
And we do have some people waiting to use. Yeah, it's as we know, it's a very busy place, a very desirable airport to either be based or fly in and out of.
Yes.
Yeah. As I said, we've been having these discussions for a while. I appreciate the work you've done. I appreciate, and my residents appreciate, that we maintain our philosophy of that asset being self-sustaining. And I propose that we move forward with the staff proposal to a vote of the council on March 23rd.
Very good. It's
Somebody's
scheduled
trying to wrap
for,
up over here.
we're going to consider that March 23rd, and I'm sure it won't be on the consent agenda, but we'll have that further conversation. Sam, do we use any general fund dollars to supplement or subsidize Falcon today?
We do not, Mayor.
Do not? Okay, that's what I didn't have that clarity. Jill, is there anything you'd like to add in transparency for the process that we've done so far?
Mayor, maybe I could add something. There's a whole team here, and I want to point this out to council as
Yeah.
part of this process.
Thank
and
you.
so you raised a question regarding the possibility of the FAA looking into this fee, and this team, we've looked at this fee extensively, and so we believe it does comply with the FAA regulations. The fee might be slightly higher than some other general aviation airports that charge a fee, but many other municipalities subsidize their airports. Despite the fact that the FAA has a regulation that says that they're supposed to be self-sustaining, many municipalities actually subsidize their airport. And so in a way, they're not complying with that requirement, but I don't think anyone ever does an investigation regarding that. And so if ultimately someone decides to challenge the fee and the FAA wants to look into that, we're ready to defend. It complies with the regulations. We've all spent a tremendous amount of time on this fee. And I want to thank Jill. For people that don't know, Jill is Gateway's also airport and is an aviation attorney. We brought her in to provide an independent review of this, so we had other eyes looking at this.
Yeah.
And there's an entire team, and I know Corinne has a team that's sitting in the back that's looked at this fee, so a lot of work has gone into this. I just wanted to reassure you, based off the question you had asked earlier, it complies with the regulations, and we're ready to move forward with it.
Okay. Sure.
I just want to thank everyone here that did this presentation. And I know that this might not be best decorum, but I am damn proud to work for a city where we were wise enough to take the time to bring in outside eyes, to do the wise choice of taking hours to mull over this and make sure that we are in compliance with outside requirements before we just fly off the handle with some great idea in our mind and do something that could then have a massive backlash later. And I want the public to understand that these are servants that work for you, and we are really taking our time to make sure that these things are done in your best interest so that you have a successful city that continues to operate under those conservative values, and so that the general public doesn't have to foot the bill down the road. So thank you so much. We really appreciate the time that you spent today, and thank you, Jim, for your awesome presentation.
All right. That was a good conversation. So we'll look forward. Jill, is there anything you want to wrap up with? Or, I mean, we let the city attorney,
Mayor,
you gonna let
council,
attorney to attorney have the last word? Or we
I
gonna-
think it's, defer to Jim on that one. I think
Okay.
it's been said.
Okay. Corinne?
Mayor, council members, I just wanted to say that, yes, we have put a lot of work into this, and I want to thank all of those that have taken their time and effort to spend this time on Falcon Field. We are at a crossroads here with this airport. It is not the same airport that it was, many years ago. And it is absolutely critical as an economic asset to our city that we keep it in a high-quality, customer service-centered, well-maintained condition where people will want to continue to be part of it. That people will want to continue to want to base their businesses and their aircraft at Falcon Field. And we've heard that many, many times from our tenants, that they chose Falcon Field because it's a great airport. And we want to keep it that way. We do, but it is going to require that we make some changes here to make that continue to happen.
Great. Thank
So
you.
Thank you.
I missed the swimming pool. For those of you that don't know, there was a swimming pool out there for decades, and that was one of two swimming pools in Mesa, and you had to really drive out far. Remember, Councilmember Adams? Missed a rectangular pool, I think. Yeah, for the airmen that trained there. So it was really great on a hot day in Mesa to go out the Falcon. Okay, with that, council will hear the proposed fees and charges amendments for March 23rd. And if approved by council, then it will be effective May 1st. And I'm sure there will be others that want to comment at the council meeting. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jill, Corinne, and Sam, and the teams behind the scene. With that, we'll move on to item B, is to take action on appointment to various boards and committees. There a motion to approve that? Thank you, Mr. Adams. Councilmember Duff, all in favor say aye. 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 Motion approves. Next is current events and conferences attended. Council members, do you have anything you wish to share? And I think also maybe some upcoming travel if there's some as well. Oh, wow. Did you raise your hand?
Because I only have one thing. I just want to.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry. Am I stepping in front of Jen?
Yeah. We do have a pecking order here.
I can't be taught, apparently. Mr. Butler and all the city staff, and particularly the budget folks, thank you very much for the public budget meetings. It wrapped up yesterday in my district at the brand new shiny Gateway Library. I think I had the best attendance in the district. Yeah. So I'm going to brag about that, but I appreciate everybody's participation, input, and management. It's really important.
Yeah, Mayor, could I just say to that point, really appreciate the residents who took time to come out. I know, there are obviously other things they could be doing with their time on a weeknight instead of coming out and talking about the city budget. But for those who were able to make time over those 3 meetings, we had a good dialogue with them. We're able to answer some questions. And I was really encouraged by the feedback that we received because people learned a lot from the presentation. So I want to thank Brian Ritchell and all the OMB staff, but also all of our departments and staff that turned out to answer questions from the residents. It's great. And I hope in the years to come, people will continue to take advantage of this because it's a great opportunity to have time with the subject matter experts here within the city. So if you have a question about streets, you had Eric Gadarian right there, able to answer those questions. If you had an issue with public safety, we had an assistant chief that was able to dive into those questions. So we appreciate council's support on that, and we're always glad to try to answer those resident questions.
Also, I think Brian's public speaking skills improved over the 3. He was getting into it on the last one.
Well, we had those budget meetings in districts 4, 5, and 6. Is that correct? But I'm
yes.
just saying that. I mean, the
It
Post.
is more regional.
Where was yours at the library? Oh, northeast,
Yeah,
okay.
then we had ours in West Mesa at the Post on Tuesday night. So thank you for everybody who came out for that. And I wanted to mention also yesterday, the mayor and I were at Coffee with a Cop at the Starbucks at Country Club in Southern, and with Fiesta PD substation and their staff and many other people around that to engage with the public for the many questions that they have about public safety. Many of them, I was surprised, were really on the east side. They just felt value in coming out and having that interaction. I also want to thank John at the Starbucks. He's the manager at that location. He's hosted us there a few times, and I appreciate him being such a great community member and welcoming all of us, because anytime you see a bunch of police cars outside of a business, you might think it may be in trouble, but no, I think everybody's starting to realize, no, we're engaging with the community there, and it's lots of fun. Thanks.
Mr. Adams?
Well, thank you, Mayor. A couple of things to comment on. I too was pleased to see the presentations that were made. I went out to the northeast facility, and I would like to compliment Mr. Ritchell. He did a great job of giving an overview, and I appreciate that staff heard the feedback from last time and included an overview. It was a modest attendance, but the people who were there were asking some very specific questions, and our assistant chief, Gina, was able to address one citizen's concerns very, very well, very effectively. So that was great, and I think we've really moved forward in the right direction with those. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that I had the honor of attending Lehigh Days last Saturday, along with the mayor. And Mayor, I won't steal your thunder on that. I'm sure you'd like to comment on it as well. But it's such a great community event. I was counseled not to try to participate in any of the events, and although I wanted to, but one of the greatest honors I've received is the mayor presented me with the Lehigh Days buckle. So I'm gonna go cowboy here. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Yes, I'd like to just echo the many thanks for the budget meetings. It was awesome. I'm very thankful for the open forum that we had. And also I wanted to give a public thanks to Jan Skinner. She invited me to come speak at the Val Vista Villages HOA meeting this week in the morning, and it was quite the turnout. And I also wanted to thank John Zlanka for taking photos, but it was a really great opportunity to engage with that community. It's actually a community of 3 different communities that all combine together at Val Vista University. And I would just encourage anybody who is part of an HOA to speak to your council members. It's a great opportunity for us to come into your neighborhoods and give you updates on what's going on in our district. And I hope I get to do some more of them. I also did one at the Golden Hills HOA last week. That was great. I had the opportunity to hear a lot of engagement and feedback from those residents, and it keeps us on the pulse of what's going on. So. And then I wanted to thank Jay O'Donnell. She put together an economic development event this past week. And I know I'm newer to the team, so it gave me the opportunity to meet some more of the businesses that operate in Mesa. So I was very grateful for that time that I could spend talking with them.
Great, thank you. Frankie? Alicia? Well, I'll just add business to baseball. That was Jay's there at the A's game, so that was good. I know the vice mayor was there. Jen, you were there as well, myself, and thank you, Jay, and getting them. I think they had 45 business people there. That turned out well. Also want to mention, I spoke at the Mesa Arts Center Volunteer Appreciation Night. Thank you, Candace, for being there as well. Found out that less than 80 volunteers produced 19,000 hours. That equals about $500,000 worth of value of savings to the Arts Center. So that's quite a big deal. We appreciate all of our volunteers in the city. I did speak at Dobson High School FFA in the morning. Imagine that. But they want to talk about agriculture and just general things in Mesa and Arizona. So I had a good chat there. Their tractor was dead. So I texted Superintendent Strong, can you get their tractor working? So he's on it. I hope he's listening. But with that, I think that covers most of it. Well, let's go with Mr. Butler, future meetings and travel plans for everybody.
Sure, Mayor, Council, again, thanks for the discussion this morning. Following this meeting, the Community and Cultural Development Committee will meet immediately upon adjournment. So for those members of that committee, study session next week has been canceled, but only 4 of you get the morning off because the CCD committee decided they wanted to have twice the fun and meet again next Thursday morning. So that will occur next Thursday. But in between that time, several of you will be traveling to Washington for the National League of Cities Conference and meeting with our congressional delegation and learning best practices from the rest of your colleagues. So safe travels back to NLC. Because of that, because of the cancellation of the study session next Thursday, we won't be reviewing the March 23rd agenda until just before the meeting on March 23rd. I want to encourage you, you'll get the first draft of that agenda today through the agenda updates today. And so take that opportunity next week when you have time as you review the agenda. If you have questions, staff's prepared to meet with you. We'll start the council, the study session on the 23rd a little bit earlier than normal. Because of that, we'll start at 5 o'clock instead of 5:15 that day, just so that we can answer any questions in person that you may want to discuss that day. But please take advantage of that time over the next week or so, and staff's going to be available to meet one-on-one or take any phone calls or Zoom calls if you happen to be in DC during that time. So great, thank you.
Any questions, council? Well, if not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'd like to mention that tomorrow night, the Alt Fest is going on at the Mesa Arts Center across the street. So please, it's art, light, and technology. They'll have AR, augmented reality, and all kinds of things with light and neon and technology and interaction with the kids. It's a family-friendly event. Please come out. First one was last year. This is second annual, and it's going to be bigger and better than ever. And it was very popular last year, and that's why it's back this year. So check it out, 6 o'clock tomorrow.
Well, with that too, some of us are wearing spring training Cubs game today. So spring training's going on in our city, both the Cubs and the, how much longer do we have?
Believe it or not, Mayor, we're only halfway there. So there's plenty of opportunities for people to come out and spend their money at the ballpark. And so please, we encourage folks to take advantage of these great games. It's going to be getting a little warmer the next few days, but that's okay. There's plenty of opportunities to stay cool at the ballpark or buy a beer and help generate some sales tax revenue.
Wear your sunscreen. All right, entertain a motion. Did I have one out there?
No. I got walked
Missed, all in favor say aye. Aye. We're done.